Today, the first thing that I want to talk about is playing some simple drum parts for Javanese Gamelan. So the drum in Javanese Gamelan, as I talked about in our first lecture, is called Kendang. Now, one challenge that we have here in this online course is that not all of you have Javanese drums in your home. So I'm going to talk first about a couple of different solutions. First of all of the drum parts are learned first with the voice. So instead of actually playing a physical drum, you can just say the syllables that are associated with each sound. Ta, tum, dang. And we're going to go over those sounds in a minute here. It really helps, even if you are just using your mouth, to actually have your hands moving in the necessary pattern so that you have a feeling for at least the coordination required to actually play the drum parts. If you have another drum in your house, great, feel free to use that. And if you don't, you can actually practice on simple household objects. So before I actually had these drums in my home, I was using just a cardboard box and a simple water bottle. So you just need one smaller item that represents a smaller drum and one larger item that represents a bigger drum, and you can just hit them on the sides. Now the sound isn't going to be excellent, but at least you can get a feeling for how your hands are supposed to be moving, and you can get a feeling for how these drum parts work. Aside from that, I'm hoping that next week I'm going to be able to bring in a video from my good friend Masconde, who will actually teach us how to make a simple Javanese drum using extremely inexpensive materials, so that you can have a basic practice instrument to work with until you are able to get your hands on an actual Javanese Kendang. Great, so before we get started, let's look at the balongan one more time for a simple piece called Lancaran Manyar Sewu. Now, this piece is going to be our introduction to Kendang. So first, let's see if we can keep track of the balongan, and then we'll jump directly into the Kendang parts. Okay, so the piece that I want to look at today for studying Kendang is Lancaran Manyar Sewu, Slendro Manyuro. Now, this piece is a lot simpler than the other pieces that we've studied the vocal parts for. So it should be pretty easy to follow along with this balongan. First thing I'd like to do is just go through a few times and make sure we're able to follow along with the balongan. This PDF will be uploaded into the portal so that you can download it, so that once we're looking at the Kendang part, you can have this pulled up if you'd like to follow along with the balongan as well. Alright, let's try just singing through this a few times so that we get a sense of how the piece actually flows. One thing that I'd like to mention before we start, and I'll get into this later, the Kendang is going to start 8 beats before the gong, meaning during the buko, it's going to start right here, is where the Kendang part is going to begin. So we'll hear Chinam ta ta tung dang, etc. And I'll explain that more as we go on. Alright, let's try it out and listen to it.
Mo
Alright, so hopefully everybody was able to follow along with the balongan. Now what I'd like to do is move straight into explaining the kendang, starting with sounds, and then we'll talk about the structure of how we actually fit it into this piece, and we can get started with playing it. So now I'd like to go over the kendang parts for the form or the bentuk called Lancaran. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Lancaran Manyar Sewu. So these drumming patterns are going to work for any piece that is in the form Lancaran, specifically in the solo style. So for Lancaran, we're going to be using Kendang dua, which means 2 drums. That means we're only going to be using these 2 drums. We're not going to be working with ciblon. So we're just going to have the ketipong and the Kendang gede. So we have a few basic sounds that we need to get. The first is represented by the symbol P in notation. Now that sound is tong, tong. And we can make it with either our thumb or just one finger on the open drum head, the larger side of the ketipong. Either way. The next sound is dun. And that's right here on the largest head of the Kendang gede, and we're going to be playing close to the edge, trying to get a deep, low sound without any of that high percussive noise. That's dun, and that's represented by the symbol B. And the last one is actually on this side of the ketipong. We're going to play a closed percussive stroke, and that's going to be using our hand like this. And that's ta, T-A-K, ta. This is represented by the symbol T. So now let's take a look at the notation for Kendhangan, for Lancaran, for the Lancaran form. Now, when we play through this, actually every time we play dun, we're also going to play ta at the same time. So not just my right hand, but both of them at the same time. And that makes the sound dan. All right, so let's look at the notation. We've got a few different parts for this piece. The first part is the buko, right? So the buko in this piece is going to come from the bonang. So the bonang starts first, and then 8 beats before the gong, the kendang has to join in, right? So the kendang signals the gong to actually start. So that's going to be ta ta tung dan, tung tung. And that last tung is on gong. So remember, the 4th beat is the strong beat. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Gong. Okay, so after we play the buko, just on that first line, the very first time, we're going to play a very simple pattern, just tung repeated. Now this is only on the first line, the very first time through. So that's just 1, 2, 3, gong. Tung, 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 gong. Just tung, over and over again. After that, we're going to start playing the pokok, the main kendang part for each of these lines. So for that, we're going to have this is going to repeat many, many times, every single line until we get all the way to the very last line. Now on the last line, we have this part called kesalahan. Kesalahan sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gong. After that, we have the pokok, again for those top 3 lines. And then the last line, we have kesalahan. This pattern is going to repeat over and over and over again. Eventually, the kendang has to signal that we want the piece to end. So how we're going to do that is actually going to speed up slightly as we're going into the very last cycle. So we're going to do that during the kesalahan. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Gong. And so on and so forth. We repeat the pokok again. Now, as we get to the end of the third line, we've got to slow down to the end of the piece. So at the end of the third line, we're going to exchange that tung, dang, tung, tung. The very last gotro, we're going to change to tung, 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 dang. And after that, we're just going to play the suwuk. So suwuk means ending, right? We're going to end the piece. And during that whole suwuk, we're going to slow down. The suwuk sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gong. And that last gong is a little bit delayed. So one more time with the syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tung, 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 dang, tung, dang, tung, dang, tung, tung, gong. All right, so let's try and practice that entire thing and see if we can make it through the piece. Normally, the Kendang would be leading the tempo, but for this, we're just going to follow along with the recording for right now. All right, how was that for everybody? Were you able to follow along? Okay, one thing you should know is that every time we have this boom, 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 boom pattern, we can actually replace it with a variation, which goes boom, 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 boom. You're going to hear that really often, right? It's a very common variation. So what I'd like to do is try and repeat the whole thing one more time, but this time, instead of using doom, 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 let's switch it out with doom, 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 doom. All right, let's try one more run through.